I stood frozen in the marble lobby of my downtown apartment building as my older brother Jack screamed at me to pack my belongings and leave immediately. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering behind their hands and recording everything on their phones. Jack waved legal documents above his head, claiming he now owned the entire building and possessed every right to evict me from my home. The shame burned through my chest as familiar faces watched my public humiliation unfold. Just as Jack reached his crescendo of cruelty, bellowing about my worthlessness, the property manager stepped out of his office with genuine confusion etched across his weathered face, asking why Jack was threatening our owner. The words hit me like lightning striking concrete. Our owner. I blinked rapidly, trying to process what Harold, the property manager, had just said. Jack's face shifted from triumphant smugness to something resembling panic, but he quickly recovered his composure. "Obviously, there's been some confusion," Jack stammered, clutching the papers tighter against his chest. "I'm the legitimate heir to this property. My sister here is just having trouble accepting reality." Harold adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and studied Jack with growing suspicion. "Mr. Jack, I've been managing this building for 12 years, under your Aunt Martha's ownership. 3 months ago, after her funeral, I received explicit instructions from the estate attorney. Your sister Coral inherited this entire property, not you." My knees nearly buckled. Aunt Martha had always been kind to me, but I never imagined she would leave me anything substantial. After her sudden passing from what doctors called a heart attack, I'd been too overwhelmed with grief to attend the will reading. Jack had volunteered to handle all the legal matters, assuring me there wasn't much to inherit besides some old furniture and family photographs. "That's impossible," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the murmur of gathered tenants. "Jack told me Aunt Martha left everything to him because he was the oldest." Harold's expression softened with understanding. "Miss Coral, your aunt, was very specific about her wishes. She chose you because she witnessed Jack's gambling problems destroying his life. She wanted to protect this building and its tenants from potential financial ruin." The revelation struck me like a physical blow. Jack had been collecting rent money from the 12 units for 3 months, claiming it was his rightful inheritance. I thought about all the times he'd bragged about his newfound wealth, how he'd suddenly afforded expensive clothes and a luxury car. "I need to see those documents." I demanded, finding strength in my voice for the first time since this nightmare began. Jack stepped backward toward the lobby entrance. "This is ridiculous. Harold, you're obviously mistaken about the legal paperwork." "Actually, I'm not." Harold's tone became firm. "Miss Coral, would you please come to my office? I have the authentic will property deeds and your aunt's personal letter explaining her decision." As we walked across the lobby, tenants began voicing their concerns. Mrs. Patterson from Unit 4 approached cautiously. "Excuse me, but which one of you has been collecting our rent payments? Jack here has been demanding cash only, and he wouldn't provide proper receipts." My stomach dropped. Cash payments without receipts meant no paper trail, no accountability. Jack had been stealing from these people while I remained completely unaware of my actual legal status. "Jack, what have you done?" I turned to confront him, but he was already pushing through the front doors, muttering something about needing to make urgent phone calls. Harold guided me into his cluttered office where filing cabinets lined every wall and stacks of tenant applications covered his desk. He opened a locked drawer and withdrew a thick manila envelope marked with my full name in Aunt Martha's distinctive handwriting. "Your Aunt Martha was a smart woman, Miss Coral. She suspected Jack might try something like this, so she gave me very detailed instructions about protecting your inheritance." Inside the envelope, I found the official will naming me as sole beneficiary of the 12-unit apartment building, currently valued at approximately $2 million. There was also a property deed transfer tax documents and a handwritten letter from Aunt Martha that made my eyes fill with tears. "My dearest Coral." The letter began, "If you're reading this, then I'm no longer with you, and I suspect Jack has tried to deceive you about your inheritance. I've watched him struggle with gambling addiction for years, and I cannot risk letting this building fall into his hands. You have always shown kindness, responsibility, and genuine care for others. These tenants need a landlord who will treat them fairly and maintain their homes properly. I trust you completely to carry on my legacy of providing affordable, safe housing in our community. Harold poured me a cup of coffee from his small machine while I absorbed the magnitude of what Aunt Martha had entrusted to me. She left specific instructions about the building's management, Miss Coral. She wanted me to continue as property manager and help you transition into ownership. We've been maintaining the building beautifully, and the tenants are all long-term residents who pay their rent reliably. But Jack showed me documents, I protested weakly. He had legal papers with official seals. I'm afraid those were forgeries, Miss Coral. Quite sophisticated ones, but forgeries nonetheless. Your aunt anticipated this possibility and provided me with the attorney's contact information. We can verify everything immediately. As Harold dialed the estate attorney's number, my mind raced with implications. If I truly owned this building, then Jack had been committing fraud on a massive scale. He'd collected thousands of dollars in rent payments that belonged to me, and he'd done it by lying to both the tenants and his own sister. The attorney confirmed everything Harold had told me. Aunt Martha had specifically excluded Jack from inheriting any property because of his documented gambling problems. She'd chosen me as her heir because she believed I would honor her commitment to providing quality housing for working families. When I finally emerged from Harold's office, several tenants were waiting anxiously in the lobby. They'd been dealing with Jack's increasingly aggressive demands for rent money, his refusal to provide receipts, and his threats of immediate eviction for anyone who questioned his authority. Mrs. Patterson approached me with obvious relief. Miss Coral, we've all been so worried. Jack has been collecting our rent in cash and telling us the building was sold to developers who plan to tear it down. He said we'd all have to move out by the end of next month. The scope of Jack's deception overwhelmed me. He hadn't just stolen money, he'd terrorized these people with lies about losing their homes. Some of these families had lived here for over a decade, building relationships and establishing roots in the neighborhood. I promise you nobody is being forced to move, I assured them. This building will continue operating exactly as Aunt Martha intended. Your leases are secure, and Harold will remain as property manager. As tenants gradually returned to their apartments, I realized Jack's betrayal cut deeper than simple financial theft. He'd exploited our aunt's death, manipulated my grief, and endangered the housing security of 12 families. But now I had the legal authority to set everything right and protect these people from further harm. The next morning, I returned to Harold's office determined to understand the complete extent of Jack's deception. Harold had spent the evening reviewing financial records and tenant complaints, preparing a comprehensive report of irregularities he'd noticed over the past 3 months. Miss Coral, I'm afraid the situation is more serious than we initially realized. Harold began spreading documents across his desk. Jack hasn't just been collecting rent illegally. He's also been threatening tenants who questioned his authority. Harold showed me security camera footage from the building's entrance. The black and white video revealed Jack approaching elderly tenants with aggressive body language, pointing his finger in their faces, and on one occasion grabbing Mr. Patterson's arm when the man tried to walk away from their conversation. This happened last Tuesday, Harold explained, pointing to the timestamp. Mr. Patterson asked Jack for a receipt, and Jack became physically intimidating. Several other tenants witnessed this incident and reported it to me. My hands trembled as I watched my brother behave like a common thug toward people who had trusted our family for years. Aunt Martha had always treated her tenants with respect and dignity, often helping them through financial hardships by accepting late payments or providing emergency repairs at no extra cost. There's more Miss Coral. Harold opened another file folder. I discovered Jack has been using your name for financial transactions without your knowledge or consent. Harold handed me bank statements showing a mortgage refinancing loan for $500,000 against the building's equity. The loan application bore my forged signature, and all the money had been deposited into an account I'd never opened. He refinanced the mortgage. I stared at the paperwork in disbelief. How was that even possible without my actual presence at the bank? Your Aunt Martha had paid off the original mortgage completely, Harold explained. The building was owned free and clear. Jack must have hired someone to forge your identity documents and impersonate you at the loan closing. The bank statements revealed a pattern of large cash withdrawals beginning the day after the loan was approved. $500,000 had been systematically drained from the account over 6 weeks, with most transactions occurring at ATMs located inside local casinos. He gambled away $500,000, I whispered, feeling sick to my stomach. Harold nodded grimly. The loan payments are due monthly, Miss Coral. If we don't address this situation quickly, the building could face foreclosure proceedings. I studied the timeline of Jack's crimes, realizing he'd planned everything carefully. He'd waited until Aunt Martha died, knowing I'd be too grief-stricken to pay attention to legal details. He'd forged my signature to steal money using the building as collateral, then terrorize the tenants to maintain his fraudulent authority while gambling away our family's legacy. We need to call the police, I decided. This isn't just family drama anymore. Jack has committed multiple felonies. Harold agreed, but he also had practical concerns about the building's immediate operations. Miss Coral, several tenants have confided in me about their fears. Grace Martinez in Unit 7 is a single mother with 2 young children. She's been saving money to move out because Jack threatened her kids directly. The mention of threats against children made my blood run cold. What kind of threats? According to Grace, Jack told her that disobedient tenants' children might get hurt playing in the building's common areas. He implied there could be accidents involving the playground equipment or the stairwells. I felt nauseous imagining Jack intimidating a mother by threatening her babies. This wasn't the brother I'd grown up with, but gambling addiction had apparently transformed him into someone capable of terrifying innocent families. There's also Walter Kim in Unit 12, Harold continued. He's 78 years old and lives on a fixed income from Social Security. Jack has been demanding extra money from Walter, claiming there are new fees for building maintenance. Harold showed me Walter's meticulous records of every interaction with Jack. The elderly man had documented dates, times, and exact quotes from their conversations. Jack had been systematically extorting additional money from Walter by claiming the building needed expensive repairs that required immediate cash payments. Walter actually has bruises on his arms, Harold said quietly. He showed me yesterday. Jack grabbed him when Walter questioned the additional fees. The image of my brother physically abusing a senior citizen filled me with rage I'd never experienced before. Jack hadn't just betrayed our family, he'd become a predator targeting the most vulnerable people in our community. Harold, I want to file a police report immediately, but I also want to make sure these tenants feel safe and protected while we sort out the legal mess. Harold smiled for the first time since this ordeal began. Your Aunt Martha would be proud of your priorities, Miss Coral. She always said the building's purpose was providing security and stability for working families. As we gathered evidence for the police report, I discovered Jack had also been intercepting maintenance requests and refusing to authorize necessary repairs. Mrs. Chen in Unit 3 had been dealing with a leaking bathroom ceiling for 6 weeks because Jack claimed repair costs would be deducted from tenant security deposits. The heating system in Units 9 and 10 hadn't been working properly, but Jack had told those tenants they needed to pay for private repairs themselves. Harold explained that building maintenance was always the landlord's responsibility, according to their lease agreements and state housing laws. Your brother created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, Harold observed. These people didn't know their legal rights because Jack convinced them the building was being sold and their leases were worthless. I realized Jack's strategy had been to make the tenants so uncomfortable they'd voluntarily move out, allowing him to rent the units at higher rates to new tenants who wouldn't question his authority. He'd been planning to profit from both the illegal rent collection and the potential for increased income from tenant turnover. But his plan had a critical flaw. Harold had maintained detailed records of all legitimate building operations, including copies of every signed lease documentation, of all authorized repairs, and financial records of proper rent collection procedures. Jack's fraudulent activities stood out clearly against the backdrop of Aunt Martha's ethical management practices. "Miss Coral, there's one more thing," Harold said as we prepared to contact the police. "Your Aunt Martha left a sealed envelope with specific instructions about what to do if Jack ever tried to claim the building illegally." Harold retrieved another manila envelope from his locked filing cabinet. Inside, I found detailed documentation of Jack's gambling history, including casino membership records, loan applications he'd submitted, using the building as collateral and correspondence between Aunt Martha and a private investigator she'd hired to monitor Jack's activities. She knew he would try this, I realized. Aunt Martha documented everything because she expected Jack would attempt fraud after her death. The private investigator's report revealed Jack owed significant money to unofficial lenders associated with organized crime. He'd borrowed against future inheritance expectations, promising to repay loans with proceeds from property sales. When Aunt Martha died without leaving him, the building Jack had become desperate to cover his debts before dangerous people came looking for their money. That explains his urgency. I said, understanding Jack's aggressive timeline for collecting rent and refinancing the mortgage. He's not just stealing from us, he's trying to pay off loan sharks. Harold's expression became grave. "Miss Coral, if that's true, then Jack may be in physical danger, and depending on who he owes money to, you might be at risk as well." Armed with Aunt Martha's investigative report, I decided to confront Jack directly, rather than wait for police intervention. The documentation showed he'd been frequenting Riverside Casino about 30 miles outside the city, where he'd established credit lines and borrowed against future collateral. I drove to Riverside Casino the next afternoon, determined to understand the full scope of Jack's gambling debts and the potential danger they posed to everyone involved. The casino occupied a converted riverboat permanently moored along the muddy banks, its neon signs promising fortune and excitement to desperate visitors. Inside, the atmosphere felt heavy with cigarette smoke and artificial lighting designed to obscure the passage of time. Slot machines chimed constantly, while dealers shuffled cards at blackjack tables, surrounded by players who looked like they'd been sitting in the same positions for days. I approached the customer service desk and asked to speak with someone about Jack Henderson's account. The young woman behind the counter recognized the name immediately. "Oh, Jack. You'll want to talk to Danny, our security chief. He's been looking for Jack for about a week now." Danny turned out to be a former police officer with graying hair and intelligent eyes that had seen every type of gambling problem imaginable. When I explained my relationship to Jack, Danny's expression became sympathetic, but cautious. "Miss, your brother has been a regular here for about 8 months." Danny explained, leading me to his office overlooking the casino floor. Started small with poker games and slot machines, but his betting escalated rapidly. We've had to intervene several times when his behavior became erratic. Danny showed me computer records of Jack's gambling activities. Over 6 months, he'd lost nearly $300,000 at various games. When his credit limit was reached, Jack had sought loans from unofficial sources who operated in the casino's parking lot and nearby restaurants. "These aren't legal lenders, Miss Henderson," Danny warned. "They're connected to organized crime networks that use violence to collect debts. Your brother currently owes approximately $75,000 to some very dangerous people." My stomach dropped as Danny explained the loan shark's typical collection methods. They started with verbal threats, escalated to property damage, and eventually resorted to physical violence against debtors and their family members. "Jack used your name as collateral for some of these loans," Danny continued. "They have your address, your employment information, and details about the building you inherited. In their minds, you're equally responsible for repaying his debts." As if summoned by our conversation, Danny's radio crackled with a security alert. 2 men in expensive suits had been asking casino staff about Jack's whereabouts and requesting information about his family members. "They're here now," Danny said grimly. "Miss Henderson, I need to get you out of here safely, but first let me show you something that might help you understand what you're dealing with. Danny pulled up surveillance footage from the previous week showing Jack at a poker table clearly intoxicated and making increasingly desperate bets. In the video, two men approached Jack's table and engaged him in what appeared to be a tense conversation. Jack's body language suggested fear and submission as one man placed his hand on Jack's shoulder in a gesture that looked friendly but was obviously threatening. "Those are Tony Russo and Marcus Webb," Danny explained. "They work for people who don't forgive debts or accept excuses. Your brother borrowed money he couldn't repay, and now they're looking for alternative sources of payment." Before I could respond, Danny's office door opened without warning. Two men in dark suits entered uninvited their presence, filling the small space with immediate tension. The larger man, who I assumed was Tony, had silver hair and cold blue eyes that suggested violence was a routine part of his profession. "You must be Coral," Tony said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "We've been hoping to meet you. Your brother Jack has told us so much about his generous sister who inherited valuable property." Marcus, the smaller but more intimidating of the two, remained silent while studying me with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating potential prey. Danny tensed beside his desk, clearly concerned about the situation escalating beyond his control. "Jack owes us $75,000. Tony continued conversationally, "plus interest which accumulates daily. Since Jack used you as collateral, we consider his debt your responsibility now." I had no knowledge of any loans. I protested, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear churning in my stomach. "That's unfortunate for you." Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a subtle accent that suggested European origins. "But ignorance doesn't eliminate obligation. Jack assured us his sister would honor his commitments using proceeds from her inherited property." Danny cleared his throat diplomatically. "Gentlemen, Miss Henderson is a guest here, and I need to ensure her safety while she's on casino property." Tony laughed, but the sound contained no humor. "Of course, Danny. We're just having a friendly conversation about resolving a business matter. Miss Henderson will give you 48 hours to arrange payment. Jack can provide details about where and when to deliver the money." As suddenly as they'd appeared, both men left Danny's office, leaving me shaking with adrenaline and fear. Danny immediately activated his radio, coordinating with casino security, to escort me safely to my car. "Miss Henderson, you need to contact the police immediately," Danny advised as we walked quickly toward the parking garage. "These people don't make empty threats, and they have resources to follow through on their promises." In the parking garage, I found Jack sitting in his car, apparently waiting for me to emerge from the casino. His face looked haggard, his clothes wrinkled, and his hands trembled as he approached my vehicle. "Coral, I'm so sorry." Jack began, his voice breaking with desperation. "I never meant for this to happen. The gambling just got out of control, and I thought I could win back everything I'd lost." "You use my name as collateral for loans from criminals," I said, struggling to contain my anger. "Those men just threatened my life because of your gambling addiction." I know. But if you could just help me pay them back, I promise I'll get treatment for the gambling problem. I'll pay you back every cent with interest." Looking at my brother's desperate expression, I realized Jack wasn't just asking for money. He was begging me to save his life. But paying his debts would mean depleting the building's resources and potentially encouraging his continued gambling. "Jack, I can't give money to criminals, but I'll help you find legal solutions to this problem." "Legal solutions won't stop Tony and Marcus from hurting us," Jack replied, his voice filled with genuine terror. "These people don't care about laws or family relationships. They only understand payment or punishment." As Danny provided security escort to ensure our safe departure, I realized Jack's gambling addiction had evolved into a life-threatening crisis that would require more than family intervention to resolve. The loan shark's threats weren't empty intimidation tactics. They represented genuine danger to both of our lives and potentially to the tenants who lived in the building Jack had used as collateral. The next morning, I contacted Susan Bradley, an attorney who specialized in fraud cases and victim advocacy. Susan had been recommended by Harold, who had worked with her on previous tenant protection matters. Her office occupied the 10th floor of a downtown building, and her credentials included extensive experience prosecuting financial crimes. "Miss Henderson, your situation involves multiple felonies," Susan explained after reviewing the documentation I'd brought. "Identity theft, mortgage fraud, extortion, and potentially racketeering if these loan sharks are part of organized crime." Susan recommended contacting the FBI rather than local police because the interstate nature of the casino operations and the organized crime connections suggested federal jurisdiction would be more appropriate. "The good news," Susan continued, "is that federal agents have significant resources for investigating financial crimes and protecting witnesses who cooperate with their investigations." Within hours, FBI agents Rodriguez and Chen arrived at Susan's office to interview me about Jack's criminal activities and the threats I'd received from Tony and Marcus. Agent Rodriguez had been investigating organized crime connections to illegal gambling operations, and my case provided valuable evidence for a larger investigation. "Miss Henderson, your brother's loan sharks are actually part of a federal sting operation," Agent Rodriguez revealed. "We've been monitoring their activities for 6 months as part of a broader investigation into organized crime's involvement in casino gambling." The revelation shocked me completely. Tony and Marcus were FBI undercover agents working to document criminal lending practices and identify the higher-level criminals who controlled illegal gambling operations in the region. "Your cooperation could help us bring down a significant criminal network," Agent Chen explained, "but we need you to wear a wire device and record conversations with the suspects to gather evidence for prosecution." The prospect of deliberately engaging with dangerous criminals terrified me, but Agent Rodriguez assured me they had extensive experience protecting civilian cooperators and would maintain constant surveillance to ensure my safety. "We'll also need your brother's cooperation," Agent Rodriguez continued. "Jack's testimony about how he was recruited into the illegal lending network will be crucial evidence for our case." When agents approached Jack about participating in the investigation, his initial reaction was panic. He'd believed Tony and Marcus were genuine criminals who would kill him for failing to repay their loans. Learning they were federal agents investigating the real criminals provided some relief, but Jack remained terrified of the actual crime bosses who controlled the lending operation. "The people behind Tony and Marcus are legitimately dangerous," Agent Chen warned. "Vincent Torino runs criminal operations throughout the Midwest, and his organization has been linked to multiple murders over the past decade." Jack agreed to enter the Federal Witness Protection Program in exchange for testifying against Torino's organization. His testimony would detail how criminals recruited desperate gamblers into fraudulent lending schemes that eventually led to property theft and identity crimes. Jack's cooperation is valuable because he can identify other victims and explain how the criminal recruitment process works, Agent Rodriguez explained. "But Miss Henderson, your role is equally important because you can document how these crimes affect innocent family members." The FBI arranged for me to wear a sophisticated recording device during a planned meeting with Tony and Marcus at Giuseppe's restaurant, a downtown establishment they'd chosen for conducting business. The meeting would allow agents to record detailed confessions about illegal lending practices and threats of violence. On the designated evening, I sat in a corner booth at Giuseppe's while Tony and Marcus explained their expectations for debt repayment. The recording device captured their detailed descriptions of what would happen to me and the building's tenants if I failed to produce $75,000 within the specified deadline. "We know where your tenants work," Marcus threatened during the recorded conversation. "Grace Martinez cleans offices downtown. Walter Kim takes the bus to the grocery store every Tuesday. Accidents happen to people who don't pay attention to their obligations." The recording also captured Tony's confession about their organization's standard practices for collecting debts from property owners who inherited buildings used as collateral for illegal loans. "Vincent has been running this operation for 15 years. Tony boasted, unaware his words were being recorded. We identify property owners with gambling problems, loan them money against future inheritance expectations, then collect from family members when the original borrower can't pay. 24 hours later, FBI agents conducted coordinated raids on the casino operation Torino's business offices and residences associated with the criminal network. 15 people were arrested on charges ranging from illegal lending to racketeering, and agents recovered substantial evidence of organized crime activities throughout the region. My recorded testimony became crucial evidence in the federal case against Torino's organization. Jack's cooperation provided additional documentation of how criminals exploited gambling addiction to facilitate property theft and identity fraud. The federal prosecutor offered Jack reduced charges in exchange for his continued cooperation with the investigation. Instead of facing decades in prison for mortgage fraud and identity theft, Jack would serve 18 months in federal custody, followed by supervised probation and mandatory participation in gambling addiction treatment. Your brother's case illustrates how gambling addiction creates vulnerability to criminal exploitation, Agent Rodriguez explained. His cooperation will help us prevent other families from experiencing similar victimization. As the legal proceedings continued, I discovered that Aunt Martha had suspected Jack's gambling problems might eventually involve criminal elements. Her private investigator had documented Jack's association with known criminal figures months before her death. She was trying to protect you and the building from exactly what happened, Susan explained. Your Aunt Martha anticipated Jack would become desperate enough to commit fraud, and she prepared legal safeguards to minimize the damage. Legal teams working with the FBI were able to recover most of the stolen rent money from frozen casino accounts and criminal assets seized during the raids. Property management insurance would cover the remaining losses, ensuring the building's financial stability wasn't permanently compromised. The federal prosecutor's office also provided victim assistance resources to help the building's tenants understand their rights and recover any money they'd paid illegally to Jack during his fraudulent management period. 3 weeks after Jack's arrest and the FBI raids, I called a mandatory building meeting to address the chaos that had disrupted everyone's lives. I expected the tenants to be angry, confused, or demanding immediate answers about their housing security. Instead, I discovered they had been secretly organizing a support network designed to help me rebuild the building's sense of community. Harold had reserved the building's community room, a space Aunt Martha had maintained for tenant gatherings and social events. When I arrived, I found the room decorated with colorful banners, welcoming me as the new owner and expressing gratitude for my efforts to protect their homes. Grace Martinez, the single mother from Unit 7, approached me with a warm smile and a thick folder of documents. Miss Coral, we've all been talking, and we want you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done to keep this building safe for our families. What Grace showed me next took my breath away. The tenants had secretly pooled their resources to fund building improvement projects, and they'd been developing detailed plans for renovations and upgrades they wanted to contribute as a community. We know Jack caused financial problems, Grace explained, and we want to help make things right. Everyone here loves living in this building, and we want to show you that we're committed to being the best tenants possible. Walter Kim, the elderly tenant Jack had been extorting, stepped forward with blueprints spread across a folding table. Miss Coral, I'm a retired architect, and I've been designing renovation plans for the building's common areas. These improvements would increase property value while making the building more comfortable for everyone. Walter's architectural drawings showed detailed plans for upgrading the lobby, improving the community room's functionality, and adding safety features throughout the building. His designs incorporated energy-efficient lighting, improved security systems, and accessible features for elderly or disabled residents. The estimated cost for these improvements is about $30,000. Walter explained, but the tenants have been saving money specifically for this project. We have $18,000 already collected, and local businesses have offered to donate materials and labor. Mrs. Patterson from Unit 4 revealed that she managed purchasing for a major construction company and had negotiated significant discounts on renovation supplies. Your Aunt Martha always treated us fairly, Miss Coral. We want to honor her memory by making this building even better than before. Harold opened another folder containing financial documents that made my eyes widen in amazement. Miss Coral, your Aunt Martha established a secret savings account for building improvements, but she never told the tenants about it. The account currently contains $42,000 specifically designated for community enhancement projects. The tenants had also organized work crews for painting, landscaping, and general maintenance tasks. Several residents had professional skills they were eager to contribute to the building's improvement, and they'd coordinated with Harold to schedule renovation work around everyone's daily routines. We talked to the local newspaper about featuring our story, Grace added. They want to write an article about community cooperation and how neighbors can work together to improve their living situation. Carlos Mendoza, the building's maintenance supervisor, had been quietly documenting every repair need and safety concern throughout the building. Miss Coral, I've been maintaining detailed records of everything that needs attention. With the tenant's financial contribution and your aunt's savings account, we can address every issue and still have money left over for future improvements. The tenants had even planned a commemorative project to honor Aunt Martha's memory. They wanted to install a bronze plaque in the lobby, recognizing her dedication to providing quality, affordable housing and her commitment to treating tenants as valued community members rather than anonymous rent payers. Your aunt often talked about you, Miss Coral, Walter shared. She said you had a kind heart and would understand the importance of maintaining this building as a place where working families could live with dignity and security. As I listened to the tenants describe their renovation plans and community organizing efforts, I realized Aunt Martha had chosen her tenants as carefully as she'd chosen her heir. These people weren't just paying rent. They'd formed genuine relationships with each other and taken collective responsibility for maintaining their shared living environment. There's one more surprise, Harold announced, producing a key I'd never seen before. Your Aunt Martha maintained a storage unit in the building's basement containing furniture, appliances, and household items she'd collected over the years. She instructed me to make everything available to tenants who needed assistance furnishing their apartments. The basement storage area contained enough furniture to completely furnish several apartments, plus kitchen appliances, children's toys, and household goods Aunt Martha had acquired to help tenants who were struggling financially. She'd never advertised this resource, but tenants knew they could discreetly ask Harold for assistance when they needed essential items. She helped my family when we first moved here. Grace explained, tears forming in her eyes. My kids were sleeping on the floor until your aunt provided beds and dressers from the storage unit. She never asked for anything in return except that we help other tenants when we were able. The scope of Aunt Martha's generosity overwhelmed me. She hadn't just provided affordable housing, she'd created a comprehensive support system that helped working families achieve stability and dignity. The building operated as an intentional community where people looked after each other's welfare and contributed to their shared quality of life. Miss Coral, we want you to know that your aunt's legacy will continue through all of us, Mrs. Patterson said. We understand the responsibility that comes with living here, and we're committed to helping you maintain the building's reputation for excellence. Over the following weeks, the tenant renovation project transformed the building's appearance and functionality. Local television news covered the story of community cooperation, highlighting how neighbors could work together to improve their living environment while honoring the memory of a beloved landlord. The building's success attracted attention from housing advocacy organizations interested in replicating Aunt Martha's model of ethical property management. Urban planning students visited to study how affordable housing could operate as genuine community development rather than simple rent collection. Real estate values in the surrounding neighborhood increased as the building became known for its innovative approach to tenant relations and community building. Property managers from other buildings visited to learn about tenant organizing and collaborative improvement projects. 6 months after Jack entered the Witness Protection Program, Agent Rodriguez contacted me with disturbing news that would require all of my courage to address. The federal investigation into Vincent Torino's criminal organization had uncovered evidence that Aunt Martha's death hadn't been from natural causes. "Miss Henderson, we need you to come to the federal building immediately," Agent Rodriguez said during our phone conversation. "New evidence has emerged that changes everything we thought we knew about your aunt's passing." At the FBI office, Agent Rodriguez and Agent Chen presented me with forensic evidence that made my blood run cold. Aunt Martha's body had been exhumed for additional testing at the request of federal investigators, and the autopsy revealed traces of rare chemicals consistent with deliberate poisoning. "Your aunt was murdered, Miss Henderson," Agent Rodriguez explained gently. "The toxicology report shows she was killed using a synthetic compound that mimics heart attack symptoms. This particular poison has been linked to other murders committed by Torino's organization." The revelation hit me like physical violence. Aunt Martha hadn't died peacefully from natural causes. She'd been murdered by criminals who wanted to steal her property. The grief I'd been processing for months transformed into rage at the people who had killed a generous woman whose only crime was owning valuable real estate. "We believe Vincent Torino ordered your aunt's murder as part of a larger scheme to acquire properties for illegal gambling operations," Agent Chen continued. "Jack's gambling debts were just the beginning. Torino planned to force your aunt to sell the building to cover Jack's loans, but when she refused, he had her killed." Federal agents had documented a pattern of similar crimes throughout the Midwest. Torino's organization identified property owners with family members who had gambling problems, then used those relationships to pressure elderly owners into selling valuable properties at below-market prices. When intimidation didn't work, they escalated to murder, Agent Rodriguez explained. "Your Aunt Martha was killed because she refused to let criminals exploit her property and tenants." Jack's return from witness protection was coordinated carefully to ensure his safety, while he provided additional testimony about Torino's murder conspiracy. When I saw my brother again, he looked like he'd aged decades during his months away from home. "Coral, I had no idea they would hurt Aunt Martha," Jack said, breaking down in tears. "If I'd known my gambling would lead to her death, I never would have borrowed money from those people." Jack's testimony revealed that Torino had specifically recruited him as a gambling client because of Aunt Martha's valuable property holdings. The criminal organization had researched our family's financial situation and identified Aunt Martha as a potential victim months before her murder. "They knew exactly what they were doing," Jack explained to federal prosecutors. "Torino told me that elderly property owners were easy targets because their family members would always choose to save their inheritance rather than fight dangerous criminals." The federal trial of Vincent Torino became a high-profile case that attracted national media attention. Prosecutors presented evidence linking Torino's organization to multiple murders of property owners throughout the region, with Aunt Martha's case serving as a key example of how organized crime infiltrated legitimate real estate markets. My testimony about discovering the inheritance fraud and the subsequent threats to building tenants illustrated how Torino's crimes affected entire communities, beyond just the immediate victims. The jury heard detailed descriptions of how criminal property theft schemes displaced families and destroyed neighborhood stability. Vincent Torino didn't just kill my aunt, I told the court during my victim impact statement. He tried to destroy a community of working families who depended on affordable housing. His crimes affected children, elderly residents, and single mothers who had built their lives around the security my aunt provided. Jack's testimony about the criminal recruitment process helped prosecutors demonstrate how Torino's organization systematically targeted vulnerable people with gambling addictions to facilitate property theft schemes. His cooperation provided crucial evidence about the mechanics of organized crime infiltration into legitimate business sectors. The trial revealed that Aunt Martha had been fighting Torino's organization for months before her death. She'd hired private investigators, consulted with attorneys, and even contacted federal authorities about threats she'd received related to Jack's gambling debts. "Your aunt was braver than any of us realized," Agent Rodriguez told me after reviewing Aunt Martha's correspondence with law enforcement. She knew she was in danger, but she refused to abandon her tenants to criminal exploitation. Defense attorneys tried to portray Torino as a legitimate businessman who had been unfairly targeted by federal agents seeking to build their careers by prosecuting high-profile organized crime figures. But the evidence of Aunt Martha's murder, combined with testimony from multiple victims, demolished any claim that Torino operated legal enterprises. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before finding Vincent Torino guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder racketeering and conspiracy to commit fraud. His conviction carried a mandatory life sentence without possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, family members of other murder victims provided emotional testimony about how Torino's crimes had devastated their lives. The federal judge described Torino's organization as one of the most ruthlessly efficient criminal enterprises he'd encountered in 30 years on the bench. "Mr. Torino, your crimes demonstrate a complete disregard for human life and community welfare," the judge said before imposing the life sentence. "You killed innocent people to steal their property and terrorized entire neighborhoods for financial gain." The conviction of Vincent Torino and 15 members of his organization effectively dismantled a criminal network that had been operating for over a decade. Federal authorities recovered millions of dollars in stolen property and returned assets to victim families throughout the region. The successful prosecution of Vincent Torino marked the beginning of a transformation that honored Aunt Martha's memory, while extending her legacy far beyond our single building. The federal government awarded me substantial compensation for my cooperation in the investigation money I used to establish the Martha Henderson Foundation for protecting vulnerable property owners from criminal exploitation. Our building became the foundation's headquarters, demonstrating how ethical property management could serve as a model for community development and tenant protection. The renovation projects funded by our tenants' cooperation had transformed the building into a showcase for affordable housing excellence. Grace Martinez received a promotion to head contractor for a citywide affordable housing renovation program inspired by our building's success. Her expertise in coordinating tenant participation in improvement projects made her a sought-after consultant for property managers throughout the region. Ms. Coral, working with you taught me that tenants can be partners in creating better housing rather than just passive recipients of services. Grace explained during our foundation's first anniversary celebration. "I want to help other buildings achieve the same sense of community we've built here." Walter Kim's architectural designs became templates for age-friendly housing modifications that accommodated elderly and disabled residents. The city's planning department hired Walter as a consultant for developing accessibility standards that would be incorporated into all new affordable housing construction. "Your Aunt Martha understood that good housing serves people throughout their entire lives," Walter reflected. "These design standards will help other elderly residents age in place with dignity and security." Carlos Mendoza expanded his role from building maintenance supervisor to the foundation's chief building inspector, training other maintenance professionals in tenant protection procedures and ethical property management practices. "I learned from your Aunt Martha that building maintenance isn't just about fixing problems," Carlos explained. "It's about creating safe, healthy environments where families can thrive." Harold's property management company became a regional leader in ethical landlord practices, consulting with other property managers who wanted to adopt tenant-centered approaches to building operations. "Your Aunt Martha proved that treating tenants fairly isn't just morally right," Harold observed. "It's also good business practice that results in stable occupancy property improvements and community investment." The local university established a criminal justice scholarship in Aunt Martha's name, supporting students who wanted to specialize in investigating financial crimes that targeted elderly and vulnerable populations. Jack successfully completed his gambling addiction treatment program and became a certified counselor helping other people overcome gambling problems. His firsthand experience with how addiction made him vulnerable to criminal exploitation gave him credibility with clients who face similar situations. Coral, I can never undo the pain I caused, but I can help other families avoid the mistakes I made, Jack said during our family's reconciliation dinner. Recovery isn't just about stopping gambling. It's about rebuilding trust and taking responsibility for protecting the people we love. 6 months after Torino's conviction, I married Agent Rodriguez, whose investigation work had evolved into a specialization in property crime prevention and victim advocacy. Our wedding reception was held in the building's community room, with all the tenants contributing to a celebration that honored both our future and Aunt Martha's enduring legacy. The Martha Henderson Foundation prevented dozens of elderly property owners from falling victim to similar criminal schemes by providing legal advocacy, financial counseling, and emergency intervention services. Our success attracted foundation grants and government contracts that expanded our services to 3 states. Our building's anniversary celebration drew visitors from across the country who wanted to study our model of tenant cooperation and community-based property management. Housing advocacy organizations featured our story in training materials used to educate property managers about ethical alternatives to traditional landlord-tenant relationships. The documentary film about Aunt Martha's murder and our community's response premiered at the Regional Film Festival, highlighting how organized crime's impact extends far beyond immediate victims to affect entire neighborhoods and communities. Local television news produced a follow-up story about our building's transformation, emphasizing how tenants and landlords could work together to create affordable housing that served as genuine community development rather than simple rent collection. The foundation's success led to federal legislation improving protections for elderly property owners and requiring background checks for people seeking loans against inherited property. Aunt Martha's story became a case study used in congressional hearings about organized crime's infiltration into legitimate real estate markets. On the 2nd anniversary of Aunt Martha's death, we dedicated a memorial garden in the building's courtyard, where tenants gather for community events and children play safely under the supervision of neighbors who genuinely care about each other's welfare. Aunt Martha taught us that property ownership comes with responsibilities to the people who call that property home. I reflected during the dedication ceremony. She understood that buildings aren't just investments. They're foundations for families, communities, and dreams. The garden's bronze plaque reads, "In memory of Martha Henderson, who believed that everyone deserves safe, affordable housing provided with dignity, respect, and genuine care for their welfare." As I look back on the journey from Jack's fraudulent eviction threats to the foundation's success in protecting vulnerable property owners, I realize Aunt Martha's greatest gift wasn't the building itself, but the understanding that property ownership carries moral obligations to serve community welfare rather than just personal profit. The building continues operating as a model for ethical property management, with a waiting list of potential tenants who want to join our intentional community. Our rent remains below market rates, but our occupancy stays at 100% because people value the security and mutual support that comes from living in a place where neighbors genuinely care about each other. Jack visits regularly, participating in community events and sharing his story with young people who might be vulnerable to gambling addiction. His recovery serves as inspiration for other families dealing with addiction's impact on their relationships and financial security. Recovery means more than just not gambling, Jack often tells people. It means rebuilding trust, taking responsibility, and finding ways to contribute positively to other people's lives. The Foundation's work continues expanding with new programs addressing predatory lending, elder financial abuse, and criminal exploitation of vulnerable populations. Every family we help avoid victimization honors Aunt Martha's memory and extends her legacy of protecting people who might otherwise face exploitation. Our success proves that communities can overcome criminal threats and family betrayal when people choose cooperation over competition, mutual support over individual advantage, and justice over revenge. Aunt Martha's vision of housing as community development rather than profit extraction has become a sustainable model that other communities can adapt to their own circumstances. The greatest lesson from our experience is that confronting injustice requires both individual courage and collective action. No one person could have defeated Torino's criminal organization or rebuilt our community's sense of security. But working together, we created something stronger than what any of us could achieve alone. Building genuine community takes time, patience, and commitment to treating other people's welfare as equally important to our own interests. Aunt Martha understood this principle, and her legacy continues through every family that finds security, every elderly resident who ages in dignity, and every child who grows up knowing their neighbors care about their safety and success. Have you ever experienced a situation where family betrayal led you to discover inner strength you didn't know you possessed? How do you think communities can work together to protect vulnerable members from exploitation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me in sharing Aunt Martha's story and learning about the power of community cooperation in overcoming injustice. Please like this video if it touched your heart, subscribe for more stories about triumph over adversity, and share this message with anyone who might benefit from understanding how ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they support each other through difficult times. Remember that every community has the potential for transformation when people choose to care for each other's welfare rather than just their own interests. Aunt Martha's legacy lives on in every act of kindness, every choice to protect the vulnerable, and every decision to build something better for future generations.